Hello and welcome to the art and aesthetically art. That's what we do. That's what I do. Hello and welcome, Denzians of the internet and fellow weird kids. Not you weirdos, there's a difference. You can be weird, but don't be a weirdo. Weirdos are dangerous, kids. Don't trust weirdos. Weird people, but weirdos, You need to run. You need to run. This is where I sit and I read stories and then I review them, and you guys get to sit and watch me speed paint on something, whether it's a picture or some swatches or just random stuff, who knows, but either way, we're doing that. I'm actually thinking about taking some of my old artwork and applying this here as well, because I got all that. Anyway, today's story is The Temple by H.P. Lovecraft, or Howard Philip Lovecraft. He was an early 1900 American author from Providence, Rhode Island. He was born August 20th, 1890, and he died March 15th, 1937. So he was like a Leo with a pinch of Virgo. For people who believe in cusp, he'd be a Leo-Virgo cusp. Lovecraft was well known for his weird and horror fiction that's influenced a great deal, if not all, the horror in some way or another. You know the movie Congo? That's actually an H.P. Lovecraft story. How about the Alien series? You know how there's this weird thing that's just stalking the crew and the peoples and doing horrible things and all this shit. Yeah, that's that's inspired by the cosmological horror of Lovecraft, which is actually something that he's literally the father of. Lovecraftian horror, or cosmic horror, or if you want to sound really fancy, cosmological horror, is a type of horror that leaves the reader with an unsettling feeling of being as insignificant as an ant compared to the strange and malevolent beings the author creates. And there's a chance your eyes will burn out if you read enough of it. In fact, Lovecraft is a very author of the well-known Cthulhu and the Call of Cthulhu, one of the most influential stories of his legacy. For anybody who don't know, Lovecraft, he never really made a living with his writings while he was alive, and he died at the early age of 46, literally in the same hospital both of his parents died in. His father, I think his father died in it first. Years later, his mother followed. He ended up being more taken care of by his aunts and stuff. He was married for a minute, and well, his wife, she tried, and she could not. I think that bothered him a lot, but it was just he just could not. She just couldn't. She couldn't. He actually, it was mainly because of his beliefs, which changed gradually over time. He started getting older, he started understanding a little more, so he really wasn't of the racer mindset like he used to be before he passed away. But he didn't live long enough for people to actually, I believe, peep that. You know what I mean? You finally get where you went wrong, and then and you're trying to get on the rightness of the path, but then all of a sudden you're taken out for no fucking reason. That was kind of what it was with Lovecraft. So a lot of people still say things about who he was, but I think that he changed right in the nick of time before he actually started getting sick and stuff. You could tell by his writings he didn't think the way he did. Speaking of his writings, it was after his death his writings actually became some of the most renowned in the genre of horror, having its own category. Lovecraft has this way of being long-winded in all of his writings, someone who can talk for hours about whether or not they're hungry, going through charts and graphs and shit. He never did that in his writings, but it was pretty close. He would go back over words and new phrasings and new ways of going about those phrasings of the horrors, and he made sure that it was just vague enough to be that disturbing to the reader. Yet, in his longing to drivel on and on the paper, his investigative voice and his journalistic deliverance of his stories make it sound similar to listening to the jaded detective telling you the tales of a man who witnessed too much and went mad over time. It's kind of romantic, actually, when you really think about it, because it's just oh, he look at him. Look at him. He's doing a good-ass job making sure people's eyes burn out from reading his stories. It's honestly, I think that's really. Lovecraft does have a lot of controversy, and I talked about this earlier with his beliefs, mainly the one where it's xenophobic and pretty racer. I like saying racer instead of the other one because it makes sense. The cat, the name If you don't know the original name of that cat in The Rats in the Walls, and you're sensitive, oh, you are either gonna have a treat or a fit. It's one of the two. Just take your pick. It also kind of seemed like his favorite word did seem to be Negro. But strangely enough, he was more xenophobic than he was racer, and that's the thing that fucks me up. It's just like, huh? You just don't want anyone in your house? Okay, I mean, I guess that makes sense. But those tendencies and thoughts, and they were outlandish, even for his time. This man said stuff that made his friends uncomfortable, and like, he was white as could be, right? And even his friends were like, dude, you're doing way too much. This is making me think about how I must sound. I don't like how this, like, he was literally changing people's lives by being the worst person, I think. Which is, like, it's so interesting when people, like the jester, but turn out to be a fool. Now, what's strangely enough is that all of those tendencies, all those thoughts, all those, outlandish things that he would say, even during his time, that's what fueled the power and inspiration of his fear of the unknown. As much as he could be uncomfortable with friends and families with his ridiculous belief system of others, he was able to make that belief a vital powerhouse when it came to fear and what is beyond what our minds can comprehend. And it always seems like, you know, my demographic, which is black, it's almost like we're connected to the most powerful beings, but he always makes us ignorant. But it's really like, do we need to really be as intelligent as you to get away with this shit? You can't even figure out how to deal with this fucking creature without your eyeballs coming out. You know, it's like a backhanded compliment, honestly. So I don't know if I should be mad or grateful. It's the little things, you know, like, and then you sit there and think about it, it's just like, well, wait, yeah, he's kind of calling us, like, creatures, but at the same time, us creatures apparently can survive this thing while no one else can. So are you saying our stupidity is a protection? Or you're mad because you got rejection? I don't know. Like, when you sit there and think about Lovecraft long enough, you're gonna get pissed. You really will get pissed. Now, H.P. Lovecraft, I have heard of many times in my lifetime over the years. I heard about him, but I never read any of his stories. And I happened to find his works through this app on Facebook. And I think it was called, like, iBooks, if I remember. Or iReads, or I don't know. It was, like, almost this interactive, like, thing on a phone where, like, you could read, like, the short stories, and the short stories were, like, cut down a lot. Like, one of the first ones was actually The Hound. Then there was one about, like, him looking out a window, and then the third story was Dagon. They were all very, very much shortened to a certain extent, but not too much where it took away from the story. And as I read those stories, opened my eyes. I was like, what? Now, this dumbass app, it didn't carry the entire ratings of the story, like I said, but it did carry the main parts. But honestly, when I was reading it, I was really bothered with the fact that there wasn't more details involved. But my brain was working its ass off, making images in my... And it's the craziest thing. Like, when I do The Hound on here, you'll understand. But it's like, the way he worded things, he didn't need to use a lot of words to describe what was happening. But you didn't really want to know what happened. Like, you want to know what happened, but you don't want to know what happened. Because it seems like there's a reason why he doesn't want to tell us, right? That's the vibe you always get from H.P. Lovecraft, right? Now, as I'm reading these stories, I couldn't stop looking at the screen as I read the words of what happened to the main characters and the thing that was also in the story. The first story I ended up reading was The Hound. The Hound is actually my very favorite Lovecraft story, just because it was the very first, and it fucked me up once I read it. I think The Cave was on that too. No, it was on a different app or something. I want to think it was, but like, nah, I really don't know. I could be wrong. So anyway, let's go to the story. It is a weird one. It's a weird one, and it actually took me a few reads to actually understand what the hell was happening in this story. Lovecraft wrote the story in 1920, probably around the time he and Frank Belknap Long were kicking it, and it was published in 1925 in the pulp magazine Weird Tales, which I think still runs to this day. But I just want to point out that he wrote this in 1920, but it wasn't published till 1925. Now I want you to think about it. This story actually took a pretty good long time to get done. Or maybe he just took his time publishing. He's just like, oh, I lost it. Here it is. Now, the story starts out telling the reader. Now, this is a manuscript found on the coast of the Yucatan, written by a Karl Heinrich Graf von Alterberg Einerstein. I know I fucked something there up. I'm good at German, but I know I fucked that up. Who's a lieutenant commander of the Imperial Navy of Germany, and he was in charge of the U-29 submarine. I guess he wrote this out and decided to stash it into a bottle so someone could find it, and dated the manuscript for August 20th, 1917. Lovecraft's birthday! Happy birthday, Ryan! Now, for reference, this is the year prior to World War I ending. What a lot of people don't know about World War I is that the German people relied on a lot of, the history lesson, right? The German people relied on a lot of marine shipping, and during World War I, the British were blockading the German ports, and this caused a lot of problems for the Germans during the war. Their people were starving out because of the blockade, and worse, they had English prisoners, and the British made sure to let the Germans know that if their soldiers were not fed well, the Germans would be getting some shit for it. Their soldiers, anyway, the German soldiers that they had as POWs. So not only were the German people starving, they also had to give better care to the soldiers of the government that is causing their people to starve. And worse, the Americans were kind of backdooring them. The Americans were chilling with the British on the DL, pretty much ignoring the Germans who were pleading for assistance from America at the time, literally on the doorstep of the White House, had the door slammed in their face, and they went back to eat biscuits and crumpets and tea with the goddamn British. Then there was the whole attack and the sinking of the Lufthansa, which was a warship that was decorated as a cruise ship. They traveled so far into German territory, turned off their lights, and just let the thing sink. Apparently it got attacked by, or allegedly, I should say. They say that a German U-boat attacked it, but you really wouldn't know. I think there was like 100 and some odd Americans, 104 or so Americans on that boat, and they died. And that's how America pretty much got sucked into the war. That was the excuse. That was your history lesson for today. History is actually really fucked up, and America has a pretty shady history when you actually look at it. Like, as a side note, the whole Franz Ferdinand assassination, the Duke, and that supposedly started the World War II when the Duke got assassinated. It took 5 times to carry out the assassinations because the assassins were kind of incompetent. The assassins also suffered from tuberculosis or some shit that affected their lungs, and then when they got caught, they stuck them in cold cells and sprayed them with freezing cold water. Go look up them symptoms and think about it. That's the only reason. I think there was something called the Black Hand or the Black Brotherhood, or I'm thinking of Skyrim maybe, but that's actually the background for that. But yeah, but honestly, I think it's because the French were still mad about Alsace-Lorraine. I think they were still mad about Alsace-Lorraine. Which, if you don't know, it was a territory that was absolutely useless. It was a territory that was absolutely useless. The Germans had control of it. When Franz Ferdinand was taken out, the Russians were sitting there, being like, hey, France, the Germans just did this shit, right? And France, who are nothing but psychos. Let's be clear, we all make fun of France because, we make fun of them, being, I guess, surrenderers or some shit. But did they ever lose a war? Have they ever lost have they ever lost a war? I'm not sure. Well, I know as soon as the Russians came in there and told them that, they were ready to go. They were ready to go. The French, they don't, they may lose, but they don't give a damn. They're gonna, I'm just saying, there's a whole bunch of conspiracies going on, but it's really weird how it all worked out to where, certain, countries benefited. But I'm not saying too much. I'm an ignorant American. What do I know? Other than the empirical measurement system. What do I know? Everyone's sick of shit. What do I know as an American? I am American. Let's see. Anyway, back to the story. So Carl tells us that he is on a sub at 20 degrees latitude, 35 degrees longitude, which I googled, and I think it's the Pacific Ocean, where he's at the bottom of the sea. He's pretty much wants people to know what's going on, but the guy's pretty the guy is, there's something wrong, Carl. He seems off. He just a tad, especially when he starts bringing up his iron German wheel, with each word having the first letter capitalized like it's the beginning of a sentence or it's an article in quotations, because I'm quoting him, but I feel as though that doesn't illustrate enough What's wrong with Carl? I'm just saying. He talks about his iron German will in the beginning of this, telling his horror story, right? This is the guy who's pretty much the last man standing after pretty much losing his mind in the worst way ever, I would think anyway, which is pride. So Carl says that on the afternoon of June 18th, he torpedoed another sub and allowed the crew to get in boats and flee after they were attacked. He was actually pretty proud of it, and mind you, this guy is off. The dude is not off his rocker. This is a story recounting from someone who's insane. So let's keep that in check. He was pretty proud of it and regrets that no, he will see the film of the enemy's sub sinking. And when his sub surfaces, a certain body is found on the deck clinging to the railing. They determine that it's either an Italian or a Greek. Once again, this is H.P. Lovecraft. Don't be surprised by his choice of words in describing people because he's already dead. Carl describes the young crewman as rather handsome. This young body seems to be, or it was, one more victim of an unjust war of aggression which the English pig dogs are waging upon the fatherland. Did I tell you all he was off his rocker? I sure did. I did tell you he was off his rocker, and he is. So they search the dude for his pocket treasures and find an ivory statue that looks like a young person with a laurel as a crown. I don't know what a laurel is. I think it's that wreath thing. I think it's a wreath thing. They put it around horses when they're winners of races or something. I want to think a laurel is a wreath thing, but I don't feel like looking it up. But yeah, I don't know what a laurel is, but we'll just go with it. I'm not Googling it. I don't care. A fellow officer by the name of Lieutenant Hines, saying that the object is special, it takes it from the crew for himself. He took it from the crew for himself. He took it from the crew for... I want you to think about it. Why did he take it from someone else for himself? It's just the object. Take your time. As they throw the dead guy off the sub deck, there are two things that happen to make every crew member other than Carl shit the bed. Which honestly, I think it made Carl shit the bed, but he's insane, so we'll go with that. The first thing that happens is as the body is being moved, its eyes open and stare straight at the two guys by the name of Schmidt and Zimmer, and just stares at them in a mocking fashion, which I'm not even sure what that is. Then there's this older guy who is Muller, who is well, Carl calls him a Muller. And then there's the older guy who's Muller, who Carl calls a superstitious Alsatian swine who should have known better, that says that he watched the body in the water. The body, according to Mueller, sank a little into the water before its limbs started moving into a swimming motion and moved south away from the sub. Carl and Hines didn't like this, and the next day was even worse. Many of the crew were having bad dreams, and they were nervous suddenly. Carl says that they got the stupid, and then he made sure they were actually suffering with something before relieving them of their duties at that time, which is like, you sit there and hear this. You sit there and hear it, and you're just like, wait a minute. It sounds like they're almost fighting over this statue, and then the next day, everyone's suffering the consequences of the statue that just is there. And now, the people, the authorities, is being absolute dicks. Going on, he also has the sub dive deeper into the water and says that this isn't where the calm ends for the crew. Which is like, okay. Thank you, tablet, but okay. A lot of the crew were actually getting sick, and they weren't able to perform their duties well, but Carl was determined to intercept this other boat, and whatever it was. I believe it was a liner, and it was called the Darcia, according to the info he got from the spies in New York. Don't mind me, I'm trying to remember. I wrote this like 2 years ago, but this is the first time I'm reading it over in order to do this, because I'm not writing this script again if I don't have to. But God, I must have edited this when I was drunk at some point. Oh my God. In the morning, they rose to the surface, and he claims that he could see the smoke from the battleship on the horizon. He also says that they're safe enough and far enough to dive and still be safe, but Carl and Kynes were more worried about Mueller. Apparently, Mueller was having visions of dead bodies in the water staring at him through portholes of the sub. He claimed that he recognized the bodies despite the bloating as those of the crew that had been killed during their time aboard. Apparently, the body they found with the statue was leading all of the dead people in the water. Everyone's sick, everyone's not sleeping well, and then we got this one dude like having visions and shit, and like the authorities are doing too much. I'm saying authorities, I should just call them the parents, because this is how it's kind of feeling. So what happened with that? What happened? Well, because Mueller was saying this, Carl and Kynes have Mueller put in irons and whipped for speaking. Nobody agreed with this. At least not the crew, but Carl doesn't care because Carl is already insane. Do you understand what's happening here? At this point, this crew has a statue and it's making them do crazy shit. They're whipping a guy for seeing some craziness. Very insane things, right? Oh, also, what's even stranger is that Carl, he also refused a lead-requested delegation by Seaman Zimmer to throw the statue into the sea. But there isn't a reason for why the answer is no. And it's not told to the reader who actually refused to get rid of the fucking statue. But it's weird how only one person had the forethought to be like, hey, maybe we should get rid of this. But no one agreed. Then on June 20th, two seamen by the name of Smith and Bowen, and I think Smith was one of the two that got figured out, who had been sick the day before, turned violent and insane, and the two, I think, are taken out, and Mueller doesn't say anything else. I don't know why they told me that Mueller doesn't say anything else, but I guess that's important. In the following week, they're still waiting on this liner that's supposed to pass through, and, it still hasn't shown up yet. Isn't that interesting? Worse, all of the crew is on edge. Zimmer and Mueller are missing. No one knows where they are. Zimmer and Mueller are missing. Zimmer and Mueller are missing. But Carl doesn't care because he didn't like Mueller anyway. He hated him even though he didn't say anything else after being beaten for speaking up. I guess Carl assumes that the two killed themselves, but no one witnessed them, or found their bodies, or actually anything. They're completely disappeared. Was it cannibalism? See, and that's the thing. H.P. Lovecraft makes you think, well, maybe they cannibalized themselves instead of, going into the ocean to join the rest of the floating bodies. You would almost want to think that. That actually is the most logical answer in a scenario that's written by H.P. Lovecraft. And I'm not exaggerating with that. Cannibalism is absolutely an answer to any question you might have in H.P. Lovecraft, even though he's never written about it. But you want to think that because it's like, oh, well, maybe that happened because they were hungry or something. But it's like, no, it's even worse than that. You're thinking of the good ending. No, he only writes the bad ones. So now the crew is just staying silent. They also stay underwater, and the current is becoming weird to them, but no one does anything about it. No one says anything about it. Nobody's saying anything about it. No one's gonna say shit about this after what's been going on, I'm telling you. Kynes is on edge and apparently annoyed enough to yell at these strange dolphins that are sort of surrounding the sub. And now the southbound current is pulling them somewhere unknown, which is just first of all, weren't you guys looking for another sub? Weren't you guys somewhere very specific in the Pacific? Why are you guys letting the current drift you away? That's so weird. Why do you need to do that? Why do you need to do that? And they don't know where they're going. Pretty soon they understood that they missed the Darcia, but they were kind of happy about it, which is why? There's nobody, if you missed it, that means you might be lost. Is someone fucking with me right now? But now all of the crew is just, all of the crew, they're just cool with it. But on June 28th, they head northbound, but all the dolphins are still around them, which I got, honestly, I don't think they're allowed to go anywhere except the direction those dolphins want to go. So, and then there was an explosion in the engine room earlier in the morning, and when Kynes goes to find out what happened, he finds two men, Reib and Schneider, dead, and the fuel tank and all machinery basically destroyed in the explosion. But he still can't find Mueller and Zimmer, but okay. So now the situation is even worse. And even though they have enough air and food, they are still stuck where they're at, and they can't exactly leave without dying from either drowning or the pressure from the ocean depths. Carl tells us that from then until June 28th, so about 5-6 days, to July 2nd, that the sub was carried southbound and the dolphins have been surrounding them, are still growing in numbers, which is just what's carrying the sub? Yeah, the engines and shit or whatever, but what the fuck is carrying the sub? Can't they just rise to the surface and use it as a regular boat? I would feel a lot more comfortable with that and send out a signal, but I guess not. Also, the dolphins are growing in numbers. At some point, there was an American warship, and a lot of the crew wanted to surrender so they could at least get out of the situation. One named Traub is shot by a lieutenant named Menz because he was getting violent, and then the rest of the crew got quiet again. Who the fuck is Menz? I don't know. But if you can't tell so far in the story who's cursed and who isn't, So the next afternoon, they see a bunch of birds coming from the south, and the ocean is acting up. They either have to submerge or be drowned in the waves, which is still concerning because their electricity and air pressure are failing anyway since the explosion. But it also makes me worry because it's just like, did you actually see birds? Did you actually see bird? Anyway, so they submerged again until they think the water is way calmer, but then there's a new problem. The sub isn't capable of rising back up to the surface. And they were pretty much stuck, and the crew were freaking out about the statue again. But they stop when one of the officers shows a pistol. I don't know who, but it's very clear at this point that the higher-ups are more affected by the statue than the crew now. Like, they recognize that shit that has been wrong since the statue came on the sub, but the officers aren't listening and are definitely willing to shoot one of their own to maintain order. Carl and Kynes would sleep on different shifts, and it was on Carl's shift that a mutiny by the crew breaks out. Sure it did. Sure, of course it would be while Carl is up that I suppose a mutiny started. He just decides anyone's gonna mutiny, and like you'll see. The crew was pretty much sick of their bullshit. But mind you, there's only 6 crewmen left, and they're all screaming about the statue and the dead bodies and how it wasn't cool that they didn't surrender to the American warship. So Carl just shoots all of them and makes sure none of them are alive. I don't know if that includes Lieutenant Menz or not, but he's not mentioned after that, so I guess so. They end up throwing the bodies of the crew through the double hatches, and Kynes becomes an alcoholic, which is fair. Now, throughout the story, Carl is continually talking down on everyone else's heritage and ethnicity. He even refers to Kynes, his most loyal comrade, as a womanish Rhinelander, who is soft, even though Kynes and most of the crew were German descent, strangely enough. Carl seems like he has a problem with everybody who isn't him, but it's apparent that Carl is more, Carl is the problem. He keeps asking people what's wrong, and then becomes a problem again. It's very clear that, he's affected by the statue way more than he knows or even realizes, but I don't think he's gonna get out of it. And spoilers, he doesn't. Well, he does get out of it. Anyway, the two decide, or rather Carl decides, to stay alive in the sub as long as possible. They're still moving southbound and the dolphins are still surrounding them. In fact, Carl notices that for 2 hours, one never goes to the surface for air. And this still doesn't weird him out or make him be like, maybe we should get rid of this. But no, he still wants to keep talking shit about the only other person alive with him, who's praying over all the people they killed on their tour. Now, it's not August 19th, and they're still going south in the ocean, with all these weird dolphins still surrounding them, and it's just like, it would have been really helpful to be able to possibly fix shit if you hadn't shot all the people, Carl. I'm just letting you know. But that's just me. As they keep going, Kynes is noticing that the rock formations have markings on them, but Carl brushes him off. But he also can't help but notice that Kynes is uncomfortable looking at the rocks and carve, as if he knows something that he isn't telling the other. I wouldn't tell him shit either. He keeps shooting people. On August 12th at 3:15 p.m. specifically, Kynes is finally nuts. He runs to the library where Carl is and says that he is calling. He is calling. I hear him. We must go. Who Kynes is talking about isn't said in the story, but if you're familiar with Lovecraft, you know who it is. You already know who it is. There's only one person who calls for you. Please take home. Now, Kynes had the statue in hand. In fact, Kynes has had the statue this entire fucking time. If you remember correctly, he took his crew members deciding that it was special and that he deserved it. He's had this entire time. He's had this statue the entire time. Kynes has had the device of mass insanity this entire time. Literally, none of this would have happened if Kynes had thrown the fucking statue in the water. But whatever. Now, at first, Carl tried to call Kynes, but Kynes is a servant. Now, Kynes had the statue in hand, and he began to drag Carl towards the hatch. And then Carl was like, whoa, wait. What are you doing? We're going to the hatch. What do you mean we're going to the hatch? We're going to the hatch. What do you mean, Carl, we're going to the hatch? What do you mean, Kynes? Kynes, what do you mean we're going to, Carl? You don't understand. We must go to that. We must go. He's calling. And then Carl realizes that Kynes wants them to go into the ocean. And he's just like, what? At first, Carl tried to call Kynes, but Kynes is determined to go out, saying that it's better to go mad and seek the God's mercy than stay defiant and face his wrath. Which is which God? Where are you at? Which God are you dealing with when you're, immortal dolphins dragging you southward to somewhere where you know you ain't supposed to be? It's just whatever. Eventually, Kynes just decides he's gonna go on his own. He'd rather go outside. But strangely, Carl asks Kynes for the statue, which is what do you want the statue for? Like, have we not learned a lesson? Isn't it strange that all the things, the only reason Kynes is alive, I believe, is because he had that statue. That is it. And Kynes had it in his possession for this entire time. However, Kynes laughs at him, and when Carl asks if he wants to leave the token, if Carl is saved, and Kynes laughs again. Both laughs are psychotic, just so you know that. So Kynes and the statue head up to go out into the ocean, and Carl goes to the searchlight to see if he can watch Kynes' body be crushed by the pressure. But all of the dolphins made it hard to see anything. You can see shit. So at some point, Carl is sad that he didn't take the statue and that he has no one to talk to since Kynes is gone now, as if he cared. The next day, he's using the searchlight to see where he is when he notices that the ocean floor dips far down, just ahead of where he's floating. He ends up in a place called a mythical Atlantis, as he says, as he observes all the ruined places and buildings in the city that's sunk deep under the water. I wonder where this is. This is possibly the city of AaAD, controlled by but we really don't know in the story from what we've been told. But we can definitely surmise that motherfucker gone too far. He should have gave the goddamn statue back. But after 2 hours, the sub sits in a plaza where from one side, Carl can see an outstretched underwater city that he's found, including this large gold statue. And that eventually he notices this temple that's made of this strange large rock that has been carved into. He's very much impressed by something that isn't German for once. And he goes into great detail about the beauty of the place and how unfamiliar everything is to a superior German intellect. He spends a long time just staring over the city, and at some point he cuts the current to the power to conserve energy. Then he decides he should be the first German to explore this beautiful and forgotten city. He eventually puts on a diving suit and goes to explore some of the routes, but later finds that his batteries are too low to do much of any searching after that. The searchlight is dying, and he tries to use it just at the doorway of the temple, right? Just so he can see it. And then he eventually tries again, but he can barely see inside. And he finally decides that he can only use electricity in emergency situations, which is like, okay, I'm glad you thought about that after the fact. On Saturday the 18th, 2 days before this actual recounting is written down and sent out, Carl is pretty much sat in the dark and starts to think that he was going to go mad like Kynes. He was pretty much feeling that sense of dread that most normal people feel, similar to the crew, but I guess it didn't hit him as bad since he stayed with Kynes so much. And it's pretty clear that he was affected by the statue greatly, but I think some of his sanity was coming back, but not by much. In fact, I would almost venture to say that maybe with Kynes holding it, that was the reason what happened to the crew. Because apparently everyone was shaking, everyone was freaking out, but when you really listen to it, nothing happens to Kynes. It's almost like the holder of the statue has control. But is the holder in control, or is the statue in control of them? And in that case, manipulating everybody? That's a really good question. He just ended up getting annoyed and had the light on, but fell asleep with the light on, and that killed the battery. Good job. He had matches, but used them up and was back in the darkness again, just waiting to die. He then realized that the strange god statue of the city was the same as the statue they took from that dead guy under deck before. This didn't scare him, but the revelation was definitely surprising to Carl. He'd taken some sedatives to help him sleep, but all he dreams about was the dead bodies of those he killed, looking into the porthole at him as he sleeps, including the young man who brought the statue to the sub to begin with. Just looking at him, being like, I bet you could sleep good now, huh, motherfucker? But whatever. Carl is a very proud man. Carl's a very proud man. But on his last entry, Carl talks about being not of sound mind when he first starts out by saying he wants to go back to the temple again, when he happens to notice this light coming from outside of the sub. And then he started to hear some kind of music from the outside of the sub, like people singing hymns or something. And as he looks out the window to see where the light is coming from, Carl finds that it's from the temple itself. Which, you know what? Most people would be freaking out about that, but at this point in time, like, man, you know what? What choice do you have? You might as well go into it all crazy and shit. As he looks out the window to see where the light is coming from, Carl finds that it's from the temple itself, which is a whole red flag, but he's crazy, so it doesn't really matter. Well, he's saying he's getting his sanity back. I don't know if I believe him, but deciding that he could no longer stop himself, he decides to sit up again and bids the reader goodbye as he resolves to go back in the temple. Carl says that he's a very proud man and his pride was affected in a way that was just way too weird. Way too much. He got a lot of people killed over that statue. And he didn't even realize that his pride doomed everyone. Like I said, this story made me have to read it a few times before I actually could really understand what was going on. But it's an interesting story from a perspective that I honestly don't relate to, but can appreciate and understand, as crazy as the dude was. But it's very clear that he should have made Kynes throw the statue back in the water. The fact that, like, all of these people in this story suffered, but it's Kynes at the very end that gets Carl to actually be nice for once. He requested something. The only reason he didn't kill Carl is because Carl had the statue. And he wanted that statue. And it was just like, what the fuck? Makes one wonder. Anyway, that was The Temple by H.P. Lovecraft. I hope you enjoyed the tale. I'll be uploading this soon. You all have a good day. Hope you had a happy new year, considering. And I'll talk to you later. Bye.